Hey,
Yeah, we're almost ready. Hi, Chris. This is James.
There's James.
I
hello.
want to say
Hi.
hi. Pleasure
Hello.
to meet you. Virtually, I like your backdrop. I usually have Bernie
Oh,
behind me, but I
thanks.
haven't set up my camera. Um, but I just wanted to say thank you for showing up. Looks like a lot of people are pouring in right now, and we're reminding folks that it's on. I'm not going to go into all your background. I'll let you pitch yourself and let you go over this. Just so you know, we usually let you talk for a while, and then we do Q&A. And if you need any
Mhm.
assistance with any of that, let us know. Otherwise, we'll let you run the show. I want to thank everybody who is showing up for this. This is a series that did very well last semester, and we're continuing into this. And we have a lot of other cool people lined up for the rest of the semester on various topics. And if you put questions and answers in, or questions in the chat, hopefully we'll have time to get to them after Chris has kind of gotten to his main pitch. And if you have suggestions on what you think we should do for future talks or speakers to look out for, feel free to send them to us or email me directly, and we'll put our information up there. So with all that said, thank you so much for Chris. I'm gonna turn off my mic and basically hand it over to you and just let you introduce yourself. I know we put out a little bit about it, but give us the condensed version, and then tell us, how do we get our game in the news? Thank you.
Okay, sure, I will. Hello. Hi. Good morning. To me, good morning to me. Good afternoon to you. I am Chris Kohler. I have a slide that has a picture of myself on it, in case you don't know what I look like. And I'm going to try to figure out how. Okay, there we go. Okay, seems like if I click in this area, I can advance the slides. So what I'm doing right now is I'm excited to tell you all that I have been a video game developer for 6 months now, and have so few stories to tell about that, because it's gone by in a total blur. But for prior to that, I was in the video games media space for I'm counting it as about 24 years. I started freelancing as a teenager when I was in high school, and continued doing that, and then went to college, came back from college, lived in my parents' house for a year as I kind of looked for a job, and then that was in Connecticut. Spent some time in Japan, and then ended up back here, just doing full-time games writing. And the sort of big thing that I landed into after freelancing around for a while was starting Game Life, which was the first games vertical that is part of Wired magazine. And that was it. And for a time, that was the only games vertical that was part of Wired magazine. And interestingly enough, they just relaunched a games vertical on Wired called Wired Games, which is hilarious, because that was I almost renamed Game Life to that back in the day. But so they have another games vertical now, but I did the original. And had left Wired in 2016, and did a stint as features editor at the website Kotaku for a few years. And now I'm at Digital Eclipse, and I had this really interesting opportunity to go over there. And what Digital Eclipse primarily does, we do all kinds of different games, actually, as a developer for hire. Work with a lot of major partners, but what the Digital Eclipse group within the company does is re-releases of classic video games. And that's really my passion, is old games, because I'm an old person. So I really wanted to, what they needed was somebody who was a journalist to actually get in and do the research about these games, dig up old art assets, scanning boxes and manuals, and basically creating the museum section, because we don't just want to take this old game and just plop it on Steam and be like, here you go. We want to actually use this as an opportunity to educate people about the history of games, do essentially the Criterion collection of video games. And so that's what I'm doing now, and I'm really excited about it. But having all this experience in the media, I thought the best thing to do would not be to come in here and tell you about the 12 things that I've learned over the last 6 months in game development, which is probably not applicable to anybody except for myself, being like, oh, that's how they do it, huh? And more about let me tell you about those 24 years in the media. Let me click my slide again to see what happens if I advance it. So and I'm gonna keep this brief. I want to get to the Q&A session because I don't know what you want to know, but we'll just sort of set it up this way. And I've got my notes on my phone down here, so you'll see me glancing. It's really difficult to sum up, and I really thought about this for a while. Like, how do you sum up the state of the video gaming press in the year 2021? Because I think a lot of people who were around for, say, the big era of video game magazines, just like 15 years or so ago, when you would go into a store and look at the newsstand and there'd be 20 different print video game publications. And that was the primary way that you would discover new games. Like, that was it. Like, if you could get your game covered or get in, from the marketing standpoint, they wanted to get ads in those magazines. The PR wanted to get their games placed for reviews and previews in those magazines. And if you could do that, then you would reach players. And that was, in fact, the only way to do that. And kind of like everything had to be filtered through there. One of the things that we saw happen, and this is something that you should consider too. And again, I know there's a lot of people on this call. I'm not really sure like who I'm speaking to, what it is you plan on doing. If your goal is to graduate and get if you want to get a job at Activision, great, you're going to have a world-class public relations department getting your all the stuff you worked on placed at publications. If you're creating an indie game right now, if you're doing something that or doing something at the Serious Games Institute and you want to get people covering it, that responsibility may fall on you. And something that is really, I think, important that video game publishers noticed a long time ago is that they didn't actually they no longer with the internet had to go to publications and pitch them on stories and say, oh, you should write this, and would you consider writing about this game, writing about that game, because they realized that they can just do that themselves. And that they can, in fact, Nintendo started blogging. Nintendo started putting up interviews with its own designers as like editorial content on its own website. Remember Sony started PlayStation Blog a long time ago. Xbox started Xbox Wire, and everybody, and then it kind of trickled down to everybody realizing like you can do your own press. Point of advice number one would be to really think about that. Something actually to look at is it just sort of came to mind. I on the last slide I said I did a book for the publisher Boss Fight Books, and I already had a social media account and I was kind of sharing that around. But there's another book that's actually become very popular, and one of the reasons it's become popular, the book is called, it's about NBA Jam, and NBA Jam it just got optioned for a documentary series. The writer of this started with, when he signed a contract for this book, he started with zero social media presence, and then he established just a Twitter account with no followers at first when he first started writing the book. And by the time that he released the book, he had, I think, about 10,000 followers or more. And he really employed a very canny social media strategy that, like, the Twitter account was not just dedicated to like saying, hey, my NBA Jam book is coming out. He would just take all kinds of like cool old video, he would take like NBA Jam screenshots and pictures and things like that and put them up on the account to try to like generate cool buzz. And then it just extended to like all kinds of stuff from 16-bit and 8-bit and 32-bit gaming history, and just do all these really fun posts about them just on Twitter. And so that by the time the book was out, he had this massive built-in audience of people. And I was thinking like, gee, that's really something good to think about, is establishing that social presence for your game before it's out, and then not getting tied into the idea that you just have to talk about your game. And in fact, you probably shouldn't just talk about your game. You should just talk about cool stuff to try to get that social buzz and build up those followers that want to see the cool stuff you're talking about. And then once it gets to the point where you're ready to launch something, that you've got that audience built in. Really seemed to work for him. So far what I've said is you don't need the gaming press, and I don't think that's entirely true. I think that right now, certainly, I mean, all the, functionally all the video game magazines are gone, right? So we're really talking about online. And you're talking about, I mean, at the top tier, IGN, GameSpot, Kotaku, Polygon, Vice, Motherboard, and, essentially a few other major sites, and then just tons of smaller sites, because people, there's tons of people who want to write about video games, and I mean, there's a lot of people doing it for, essentially little to no pay, just because they're so passionate about doing it. So you see all these sites out there, and one must figure, you've got to be able to get to them somehow. And so, and certainly, coming out of Kotaku, I can say that, traffic was very, very healthy. Like, there are millions of people out there who still want to read about video games and who aren't necessarily just watching, because, I mean, of course, one of the other major things that happened was YouTubers, Twitch streamers, this huge, the democratization of publication that happened when blogs hit in 2005 happened again with video and streaming, and so you have a lot of really talented people out there, and just producing tons and tons of content. And I'm not really in a position to talk about how would I get a popular streamer to stream my game. And I don't want to actually position myself as being an expert on that, because I'm not, but I can certainly talk about angles that you might want to take in terms of, in terms of traditional publications, because I mean, certainly I think one thing to think about is streamers must kind of gravitate to whatever is popular, and certainly whatever would allow them to generate interesting streaming content. Your game might not be a sort of a streamer forward piece of material, but if you're talking about writers, we don't have to make entertaining streaming video content out of your game. Your game could be it could be a Twine game, but if you touch that person, if you hit that person right, they might want to write about it just to get it out there. I forget what my next slide is, so we're all going to find out together when I click. Oh, yes. So I feel like I want to, on this slide, quickly sort of brush aside this like common myth that, you hear about this all the time. You hear about this from people who, you hear about this from sort of like, rando person on Twitter, and you hear about this from, but every now and again you will hear this same sentiment echoed by a major executive at a video game company that says, well, of course, as we all know, writers, they're paid by the click, so they got to get those clicks so they can get their traffic bonuses and their money. And I mean, it's so far from being true. I can't even tell you. Now, what I certainly need to say is that, traffic, which is to say the number of people who are actually interested in reading about certain topics or certain stories, does come into play. Definitely, when I started Game Life, it was different. It was absolutely different, because in that 2005, 2006, 2007 early blog kind of era, websites absolutely did make a point of having traffic-based incentives for their writers. Like, if we did a story and it did really huge numbers on the website, there could be thousands of dollars in bonuses waiting for you at the end of the month. Even when I came into Kotaku, that was gone. It was long gone, but there was still it was funny because there were still some vestigial remnants of that policy, of that type, still baked into some of the tools where people were able to sort of track their own traffic stats. I'm like, what is this? It's like, oh, that was from years ago when people, were getting bonuses based on traffic. So people eventually realized that that was like massively counterproductive, that was actually bad, because all you did was just sort of you incentivize people to chase traffic over everything. I think you really incentivize people to, write salacious headlines that maybe were not backed up by the actual facts of the story. I think sadly for smaller games and things like that, you probably incentivize people to just look at an indie game and say, it's, why would I write this up? It's not gonna do any numbers. So there's no point of that to me. So I think just generally, I think there may, I can't speak to every smaller site out there. It's entirely possible that, there's a lot of smaller sites out there that do have, traffic-based incentives and things like that. But certainly when people are talking about like, and again, I can really only speak for places I've worked at, but you hear it a lot about Kotaku, and it's just not true. This is not to say though, that traffic doesn't impact everybody. It impacts you, it impacts me. And this is because, we can all see the traffic on certain stories. And even if that's not directly affecting, your job or your pay, it gives you an indication of like how excited people are to read about a thing. And so just like to throw some numbers out there, like at Kotaku, if we had a story that hit like 100,000 page views, that would be like, wow, fantastic, great job. That was maybe not a grand slam, but a home run. Like, congrats, like that's awesome. If it did like 40 to 50K, it was like, okay, good. That was a solid story. That was worth doing. That was like worth your time in terms of like the returns, just on a pure numbers based sort of a thing. If a story got like 20,000, that was sort of considered like by everybody, like that was okay. That's the cutoff point for like, you hit the bare minimum of interest, where it was sort of like from a traffic perspective, it was worth doing that. And then if it was under that, it was like, okay, this is not resonating with people. Like if it was under 20K. And the thing is, every time we would put up a piece about like an independent game that we were kind of discovering for the first time, that was about where it would land, would be in that 10 to 20,000 range. But we kept doing it, and we kept doing it knowing that was going to happen, because I think what's really important is that we're not chasing traffic. We get passionate about cool games, and we want to find the new cool thing, and we want to show it to people. And also, importantly, again, when you're always looking at the traffic numbers, you're always thinking about traffic. But I think what's kind of happening now is that people are trying to get, especially website bosses and management, to kind of move beyond like those raw traffic numbers as a key performance indicator of how you're doing. Because sometimes, one of the things that they say is that like some of the highest traffic stories at a website are the story is, what time is the Super Bowl 2020, and then with that headline, and then that just gets and then you spend 6 months putting together an investigative feature, and this what time is the Super Bowl 2020 outdoes that traffic by 10 times. So it's not so much about making every story. Even if a story only brings in 10,000 readers, if those 10,000 people are genuinely there because they appreciate the content that you're doing, that it elevates the prestige of what you're doing. It brings in it could bring in a really good, solid, reliable, regular reader. You could generate a new customer essentially that's reading stuff all the time, and that's better than the person who just doesn't know what time the Super Bowl started. So there's a push-pull to the whole thing. And what does this have to do with you, the listener? When a writer says, hey, I want to cover this small independent game that nobody else has covered about, everybody's kind of going in fully knowing that like we're doing this for reason, we understand it's not going to bring in as much traffic in a meaningful way, but we just feel like we have this obligation to look outside of what is immediately popular, and so I think what you want to do is create a situation where you have something. I mean, obviously you want people to get passionate about what it is you're creating, but ultimately you're up against limited resources. It like indie game coverage exists, it will continue to exist, but from a pure numbers perspective, it's really unlikely that any one game, that your game is going to be able to break through, because I mean, so I was kind of like looking this up and like, on Steam every day 30 games get released every day. So it's impossible for any one outlet to cover them all. It's impossible. I mean, it would be really difficult for an outlet even just to devote themselves to like covering one of those games that's released every day, considering that there's so many other things that have to get done around the same time, and so it's important, I think, sort of as to remember that your game, whatever it is, like doesn't just automatically, just for virtue of existing and being a game and being cool, it doesn't just automatically get coverage in the press. And you might say, well, no, of course not. But you have to kind of have the mentality of start from assuming that you're going to get nothing and try to figure out how do you push past that barrier. So how do we do that? The big thing is, what is the story? The story cannot be, here is a video game. The story cannot be, I made a platformer, it's fun, here it is. Whether that is, your game may lend itself to being, it's like the elevator pitch, the hook, like what makes it unique. Really try to figure out how to convey that in a sentence. And if you can't, I'm not saying you have to change the game. I'm saying maybe think about a different kind of story or context around the game. So I mean, talking about a game that just in and of itself just innately has a really good story, that based on the actual game design. I was wandering around PAX, Penny Arcade Expo, one year looking for stuff to cover, and was in the indie mega booth, which is a big collection of indie games, and saw, glanced over at a very small table. Like they didn't even have a booth in the indie mega booth. They had a temporary station that they were only occupying, I think, for a portion of each day, at a little table with a little folding chair. But I saw somebody with an Oculus, DK1 old headset on, and somebody else with a binder full of paper, and they were yelling at each other. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. So I gravitate immediately towards this. And this game ends up being called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. And this is one of the stories that I came out of PAX with, because what it was is, the person, if you don't know, the person inside the headset is looking at a bomb that has to be defused, and it has wires and numbers and switches and dials, and they have no idea what to do with it. And the person outside of VR has the binder that tells you how to defuse the bomb. So the person can only see the bomb, has to say, okay, there's 3 wires, they're red, green, and white. And then the person with the binder has to go find the page that says wires. And then it says, okay, if the wires are left to right, red, green, white, then cut the white one while holding the red button on the other side of the machine, which the person inside the VR headset would have no idea to do that. That automatic, that was the story. And by the way, I put the piece up, and the traffic was awful because it was an indie game that nobody had ever heard of. And also it was VR, which turns out to be, I mean, absolute traffic death. Anything with VR in the headline, even today. I went and covered I don't know if it's out yet. I think it might be coming out really soon. The Medal of Honor VR game, which was like, this was the biggest VR announcement ever, right? This was Electronic Arts saying, we're going to take our Medal of Honor series and it's going to be exclusive to VR on Oculus. Big deal. Where we interviewed World War II veterans in VR. I mean, they went crazy with this. It was amazing looking project. It was like the highest end, VR thing you'd ever seen. I got an advanced preview of it. I wrote up the preview. The story went live, and I mean, literally, I swear, I think on day one it did not even get to the 10,000 view mark, which is what I mean. I couldn't even believe it, because I mean, there was a huge franchise tied to it, but I think a lot of people just, they see VR and they're like, oh, that thing I don't do, okay, and they're not interested in finding out what's going on. It's kind of it's a big problem. So if you're doing a VR game, you have even more hurdles towards getting the press coverage. But I will say that certainly I, in my time in the press, and certainly people now, are like always really interested to go to an expo and do a VR demo anyway. So you do have that coolness that people will continue, I think, to keep trying to convey to readers, because some of those experiences are remarkably cool, even if people don't want to read about them right now. So let's say your game does not have that story of that immediately understandable hook. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the game itself, though. I mean, every creative project has some kind of origin story or has some interesting context around it. So think about that. Think about and talk to other people, too, about like, maybe, your life is really interesting in a way, or the way that team came together, or who's on the team, or what you've done before, or how you got to this point. Like, there actually could be something there that when if a journalist were to get that pitch, they'd say, oh, that's, if you can make them open the email, if you can get them to read a little bit about it, it might actually be your in. So don't just think about the game itself. Who's I sort of jotted down a list here, but like, who's making the game? Is it what are your backstories? Is this something that's like, are you making this because there's an old game that you loved that they never did a sequel to, and you're trying to sort of create a spiritual successor to it? Or is it a tribute to something that people already know? Is there another game you can kind of hook it on to? Do you have is there a news peg? Is it a game about universal healthcare? Is there something that's in the news right now that this pertains to? Is it a game where you hold the controller upside down to play it? Like, if somebody made a game where you had to take an Xbox controller and hold it upside down in order to play it, I feel like you're already halfway there in terms of at least getting somebody who might be walking by your little table at a convention to look over and go, what's that? And then, like, that's like step one. I'll skip over a couple of things here because we are kind of moving really fast on time. This is something else that I really wanted to bring up. Rami Ismail, the game developer, has developed this sort of like essentially almost drag and drop, create your own press kit tool for your website called Press Kit. It's at dopresskit.com. And this, I mean, basically what's great about this is not that he's saving you the work of doing it, of putting something like this together, but he's also done all the thinking about what are the categories that should be in something like this. And even if you look at this sample from the Octodad used this, and you can see like monetization permission and things you might not realize that journalists need if they're writing a story. This is are sort of are already kind of baked in here, and you just need to add the content. So this is really something to think about, just giving people the tools that they need to more quickly write something about your game and just have this kind of stuff up there. And this is I believe this is free. This is just something that's just everybody can just use as a sort of a gift from Rami, who wants people to be able to do this. And then again, moving a little fast because I really want to get to Q&A, but do's and don'ts. And I wrote this out and I looked at it and I'm like, I think this is how you write do's and don'ts, but it's bothering me because it's not consistent with each other, because you technically wouldn't pluralize do by adding an apostrophe, but then I didn't do that with don'ts, but there is an apostrophe. It looks really balanced. And I looked, and in fact, even though this looks wrong, this is actually formatted correctly according to AP style. They actually recommend you do it the wrong way. I don't know. If I were to put a second apostrophe in don'ts, it would look weird. And then if I take this one out, it would look like dos and don'ts. Yeah. So anyway, dos and don'ts. A do would be if somebody actually, covers your game or talks to you or whatever, like send that follow-up thank you note, no matter what they said about the game, no matter if you thought it was going to be 1,000-word piece and it was 100 words out of some other piece. If they mentioned the game, like just keep that relationship going, send a kind thank you note. That is noticed and it's appreciated, especially for next time or ongoing coverage. If you find that you did not get the coverage you expected, or the message didn't get through in the way that you had hoped, I mean, obviously if people got facts wrong, you want to reach out and try to correct them, but if they just don't like it or if they just don't get it, I feel like still the best thing to do is to just be like, hey, thanks for the coverage, we appreciate it. Because ultimately it's about, I think, maintaining, a relationship kind of going forward. And again, like factual corrections, absolutely reach out about that kind of stuff. And people should be, correcting facts. Figure out what the preferred method of contact for people is and stick with that. I think that I've definitely had a lot of experiences with some people who think that they are, that like, this is the hustle. Like I've got to shoot my shot and I've got to like make absolutely sure to follow up 1,000,000 times. I'm going to send that email. Then I'm going to send it again. Then I'm going to send it a third time. And then after I don't get the response the third time, I'm going to send a fourth email saying, are you the right contact person? Can you put me in touch with the better contact person? And then when that one doesn't work, it's time to send a Twitter DM. And then it's like, well, should I be looking up this person's cell phone number and calling them? And I think there's this like sort of like escalating, like this is getting less and less appropriate every time. The email inbox, you start as a journalist and your email inbox just immediately just starts filling up with hundreds of emails. And it would be a full-time job to click on each one of them and reply, sorry, I don't have the time. So you are obviously competing for eyeballs and attention. And that's where having a public relations professional, a good public relations professional, might help you craft that email with that great subject line that's actually going to get somebody to click on it. But I think it's important to, send the overtures, and then maybe, if you're not getting the response that you want, probably back off, probably find a different, maybe even, try to find a different person. You should be actually really trying to pick your targets, because find out more about the people that you're, the individual people, not the outlets, because you can see like this person has covered games that are very similar to yours in the past. Like maybe you should be writing directly to that person versus, this other writer. And just bear in mind, like you're kind of like going up this this massive hill, trying to get the attention of people in a sea of things crying out for attention, and just it's like you have that email inbox open and you've just sent this one email, that's just sort of going into this email pit of hell for somebody, and try to bear that in mind. So I'm gonna let's get right into Q&A. I'm sure there's a lot of things that I didn't address that we'd like to talk about. So I don't know what to do. I don't really host Zoom meetings, so maybe somebody. Let me see.
I would go ahead and
Oh, hey James.
yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. I mean, this information we can put it in chat maybe, and then I think it would be better if you just want to stop sharing so that people can see your face. And then also you could open up the chat, because I think the easiest thing for people to do, they could raise their hand and turn on their mic and then ask a question. But if you just, as people in the meeting, if you just want to put your question in chat, for example, I had one I was going to start us off with. I just put it in chat. It says, what phase of a project would press be looked at. Chris can then read it off and answer it, and do follow up and that stuff that way. And if we're not getting to questions and you want to ask in person and you use a mic, I believe there's a raise your hand or reaction somewhere at the bottom. You can do that, and then we can call on you when we get a second. So and it'll show up in the list with a hand and all that stuff. So, all right. So Chris has done a wonderful job already, kind of giving us some primers. I started us off with a question, but for the rest of you folks that are following along at home, I know you have some dreams of your own, potentially for games, etc. What questions do you have, or comments, or things that you want to follow up with Chris on? So with that, it's open. And Chris, you can answer mine to start us off if you want.
Yeah. So, well, I'm accidentally going to bring in a little bit of my baby game design knowledge here and say that, you're asking at what phase of a project should you be looking for press? It's tough because I think that we, kind of innately understand that, and certainly, veteran journalists understand now, like, yeah, games start out not fun, and then during 90% of the development they are not fun, and then sometime at the end of everything, everything gets polished to the point where the fun is hopefully found. And so it's tough to bring in the press, and it's like you think, oh, they're going to get it, I'm going to put a controller in somebody's hand and they're going to understand, they're going to be looking for the kernels, they're going to see the same things that I do, they're going to see the potential, they're going to understand this, and it's not necessarily true. And I think especially if you I think if you take a random journalist, especially maybe a younger person who doesn't quite understand the how the process, they just might pick it up and have no fun and think, why did this person make me play a game that's not fun? You might want to wait until you're done to ever show it off in the first place. It might be dangerous to do that. It's really, really difficult. It's a difficult situation. I think it really, I hate to say it depends on the game, but I'm going to say it. I think it depends on the the game.
I kind of figured that would be the answer. That's why I threw it out there. It's a very strange one. If you want, I can help actually read off the questions for you, just so I can keep track of chat for you.
That sounds good. That sounds good. You go ahead and pick the questions.
The next question that I see that has come in after mine, I didn't see any earlier. Nick asks, how can we use our indie game to possibly get a partnership with a larger company? I don't know if this is something you can directly speak to, but it does apply to the fact that marketing and pitching is going to help with that. But is there something you can talk about on, like, how do you get a partnership with a larger company by and maybe that's building press. I don't know. Is there something you can provide insight on there?
Yeah, I mean, trying to think about, certainly I think if you, okay, so you have an indie game and there are, there's different things, right? There's do I want to take this game and sell it to a publisher? Do I want, because there's people who will publish your game, distribute your game. I think definitely if, in that case, if you can show them that there is advanced buzz in the press for your game, that is a big help, because that partner, that publisher is going to be risk averse, right? And anything that they can do to kind of cut down on the risk is going to be helpful. So in that case, if you were like, okay, we have this game, I want it to get published by something like Devolver Digital or something like that, I would say it seems to me that showing that, if you were to show that game at a small scale at an expo or something like that and just try to get any kind of buzz you could, then that gives you, I think, more ammo going in, especially if you're a first-time designer, especially if you don't already have that cred built up from previous games. I feel like that would give you more ammo as far as like going in and being able to maybe get a deal with a company. Also, it's like there's not, I don't know as much about this, but it seems like there are more than just standard publishing deals. Like it seems like if you look at sometimes even hardware makers like Logitech, things like that, like they will partner with certain indie games, especially if there's a co-marketing angle they can work with this game working well on their their hardware, stuff like that. So I mean, consider that as well, and also really consider that even if you don't get the press, the networking aspects of events like these might actually also be helpful to you.
Okay, so the next question we have up here is from Jordan. They're developing a SNES, the old Super Nintendo style turn-based RPG. And their question is like, how do they pitch that game? Because the genre is slower, it's text-based, like, in the gaming press, like may not be looking to cover things like that. And again, it's to your point, I think you were talking about it, like there's niches out there in games. How do you pitch a game like that in a way that maybe gets people to take a second look?
I think the answer to this question is going to be easy, because I think that you I think that your assumption here is kind of off base, because there's a lot of old people like me still working in the press, and people who love Super Nintendo turn-based style. If you would come and in fact, I mean, there's been a lot of people have left Kotaku recently, but if this was a year ago and you would come in and said, I'm developing a Super Nintendo style turn-based role-playing game, I think there would have been interest from like me, who loves those kind of games, Jason Schreier, who's now at Bloomberg, who is a nut for old school role-playing games, Michael Fahey, who is actually still there at Kotaku, who loves this sort of stuff. So I think I think you've actually, like, you've got your hook there, because not a lot of people are actually developing Super Nintendo style turn-based role-playing games at this point. And so you've already sort of got the elevator pitch there, because I think there's more people who want to play those games than there are new games in that genre for them to play.
Yeah. So would you agree, like, it's kind of like I think you mentioned, it's like it's almost like doing a research on your potential audience in the press, right? It's like finding the folks like you that like these things and going, hey, these are the people I should email. And then we get to a next question from Tony. That's, have you ever responded to any person's emailing you? Is that like a normal way for you to get these pitches, or to find them? Like you mentioned a lot of finding them at shows and stuff, but I'm sure your email box was full. Like, are any people just kind of sending you this all the time? Like, are there ones that are memorable to you that have stood out? Like, what got your attention when you were getting cold called, essentially, in the digital era?
I mean, it probably would have been, so at Kotaku, not as much, because it wasn't my job to do that. We definitely had people that were definitely in the business of trying to source and write about new indie games, and they would have responded to many more emails. Certainly at Wired, which was, I mean, I was kind of there as kind of the, during like the beginning of the indie explosion, and later on. I'm trying to think of like what would a good email have been. And honestly, I hate to say it, but it's like it's probably something that kind of tied what they were doing back to some older type of game or some pre-existing type of game that they and I maybe had a shared affinity for. And so I think that when there was that sort of targeted, like, hey Chris, I saw your article about a Final Fantasy game for the Super Nintendo, we're developing something similar, that probably would have made me be more interested. And it's like, oh, like you read the piece I wrote, and we both like the same thing. Okay, interesting. But I will say, most of, certainly from my perspective, most of the stuff that I got excited about was because I saw it at a convention. And obviously the problem with that is it can be very expensive to go and do that. But I think people have innovated a lot of less expensive ways to show a game at a convention. And so that may be something you should look into, and don't automatically assume that you can't do it. Maybe look for what are potential ways to do it where it's not budget breaking.
Yeah, and there are partnerships, I think you mentioned too, where sometimes you can get into indie booths or indie mega arcades or other these things through partnerships and things like that, and they actually help defray the cost. We actually had that with one of our companies in here too, and so that works really well. So the next question comes from Ryan. Should a game designer worry about getting bad press? Is there bad press? And is there things that, they should avoid in their games that frequently get bad press, like VR?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, well, yeah, the problems with getting people to read about VR, I mean, it's not like the press is not bad press, right? It's actually, often like this glowing coverage. My feeling has always been, if like a negative, or I mean, I guess I don't really, maybe you can give me some clarification as to what like bad press would be. Like if I play, okay, so let's take this one situation of like, I went to PAX and I saw a game and I played it and I thought, I'm not really into this. I'm not going to write a story saying I'm not really into this. I'm just going to not write anything about it. I'm trying to think of like what bad press an indie game may have gotten. I mean, certainly you've seen cases in which a cool looking game is shown and then later, one of the creators is shown to have had, bad social media postings in the past or something like that. But that's honestly, I mean, that doesn't really happen a lot. It's happened occasionally. I would say don't be afraid of trying to drum up press for your cool game, just because you think that press might somehow be bad, because I feel like the odds of that are kind of astronomical.
Gotcha. I think Ryan clarifies that they're just trying to figure out what would be bad press. Like when that came to mind, like I'm thinking things like Anthem or No Man's Sky, where you didn't live up to your experience, but then you can always turn it around, right? So that comes back to the, is bad press, or is it just a way to get your name out there? But as long as you do something to endear people later, maybe that's a good plan. But I don't know. There were other things that you've seen where people just kind of messed up completely and the press got hold of them, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, if you're looking at Anthem or No Man's Sky, where something that is like, hugely hyped up, then that's kind of different, because I mean, so human beings, sometimes it seems like we love nothing more than to build something up and then tear it right down again. And certainly I would caution, because I mean, Hello Games on No Man's Sky, that was a small indie team, and there was such a hype machine around it, helped by, I think, the first parties and things like that, and like putting a lot of money and hype and attention and trailers and huge E3 trailers and stuff like that, for something that was fundamentally a small project that was being worked on by a small group. My filter has decided that I'm gone. Oh, I'm back.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you're working on a smaller independent project, I even if, well, here's the thing. So often, and if I as a game reviewer had done my job correctly, sometimes I'd get a comment like this. I'd write a review of something and people would read that review and say, your negative review convinced me that this is actually something that I want to buy. And I mean, that's great. I mean, that's fantastic. Like, I've given my opinion on something, but I've done it in such a way where I've also explained what this is and who it's for. And then I say, well, it's not for me. It's not my thing, but somebody else can identify it and think, oh, that's exactly my thing and the thing I want to play. So in that case, in that, I'm going to say, that old adage of there is no bad press. Of course there's bad press, but like, if we're just talking about, say, if somebody played your game and they didn't like it, at least they wrote, it's like, at least they wrote about it. At least that name is out there and at least other people can see it and maybe say there's some people out there that look and they say that, that game is, or this writer is spot on. So I'm not going to play this. And there's some people who are like, this guy is always wrong. And I'm just going to do the opposite of what he says. And I'm going to buy this game.
Oh, yes. We got another question. How often do you run into free games that made money off of merch and dice? Is that a feasible thing to do?
It seems like it, right? I mean, I feel like it's, again, the problem with some things like this that explode into popularity is that they're total unicorns and you never know where one is going to come from. And it's a total shock. I mean, everybody is playing Among Us, right? And that game languished for, I think, years, to the point where the developer was like almost ready to give up on it. Not that that's a free game, but just it's hard to know where these things come from. But I mean, yeah, like there is something to be said for thinking about. And I think what you've asked is like, it's not even so much like the question itself of how often do I run into this is not as interesting as the fact that I think you've just given a good suggestion, which is the idea of like, oh, what if you were to think about a different monetization strategy for your game, give it away for free to totally get it out there, and then find those fans, because it's kind of what it's what like free gotcha games do, right? Is they give it to everybody and they find that 1% of people that's willing to sink thousands of dollars into digital merchandise, and that's how they make their money. Well, gee, it almost seems like you've this is like a more ethical way of doing it, where you're finding that 1% of those players that love your product so much you're going to sell them a plushie of the main character or a cool t-shirt or something like that as well. So as creating that stuff is creating plushies and t-shirts and things like that, and the that becomes more democratized as well, that becomes maybe a potential pathway as well. Etsy, excellent. The video games,
right? Wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Oh my gosh. All right, so I don't see any other questions. We have just a few minutes left. If there's anybody that has a dying question that hasn't got it in, raise your hand or type it real quick into chat. There's one from Robbie. Robbie, what do you got?
All right. Well, I've got a couple questions for you, Chris. First of all, best curry. What is best curry? You're an expert. You're a world-renowned expert in Japanese curry as well.
This is actually very hello, by the way, to my dear old friend Robbie Dietrich. I love you and miss you.
Yeah, miss you too.
Just in the news recently, my absolute favorite Japanese curry place called Hinoya, and they're actually opening up in San Francisco, and I can't believe it. I'm so excited. This place is just absolute top tier Japanese curry. So if you go to Tokyo, go to Hinoya Curry. That is really, really the best. So that's the answer to your question.
Awesome. Well, one more thing. I just want to see if you can let's see if we can get this on there. If you can identify
now.
Both the people on this picture are in the stream right now. Actually,
on the call. They're both on the call.
Yeah, they're both on the call. I think if one of them will enable his camera, we might be able to see him too. If he enables the camera, maybe moves around or something, or say a thing. Reed, unmute just briefly. Say hi.
Nope. Oh wait.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice. There you go.
Hi, Reed.
I don't see
The
any other
last time
questions.
I saw Reed, he was I think he was maybe 3 years old, and his and Robbie, you convinced him that I was Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah, that sounds fair. Yep, that's about right.
Wow.
Sorry to disappoint you. I am not Wreck-It Ralph.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, I do want to say, since we're running almost to the time limit, and I haven't seen any real questions that have popped in. I think now we're resorting to Robbie bringing his kid out here and exploiting him for the stream.
Always.
I just want to say thank you. Robbie suggested you, and I followed your work before, and I think it was a great suggestion. And I've loved your work, and I'm glad you're working in the industry now. And I'm sure it's a big difference going from
Yeah.
one side to the other. That's a whole different topic. Maybe we'll do later. But I wanted to thank you, and if everybody can, give a clap to a virtual clap to our host here, our wonderful guest, Chris. I'll do it here. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. It's nice to get people from all parts of this. They're putting some of your information in here too. We will be putting the stream up on the same site, the Speaker Series site, so people that need to go back and reference something or tell somebody, oh, you missed this, you should watch it. It will be there. All of our upcoming events will also be up there. So we've got the next evolution of animation coming up as the next one. And sadly, I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have the date. I want to say it's the 24th of March. Am I remembering it right? No, February.
February, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, February 24th is the next one, next phase of animation evolution. We're going to do a special one for parents. So kids on this call, you don't necessarily need to come to this one, but we're going to do one for parents about what they should know about video games, since you guys are playing them a lot more in COVID. We're doing something about building your own board game, and we're doing something about body ownership in virtual reality. Even though virtual reality apparently doesn't get much press, maybe this one will, because it's different and it's cool research, and it's some of our own folks here in the graduate program. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks again to Chris. We love doing these, and if you have suggestions for new stuff, or if you've got folks, Chris, that you would suggest that we do, or anybody in here, send them to me. Send them to us at the SGI. I'll put my email in here for anybody who doesn't have it, and we'll continue to do these. So thank you so much. And
yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, I enjoyed it. I was very good.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. Take care.